Hello everyone, welcome back to Oak Leaf Insights. So today we're going to talk about Thule, one of the most mysterious islands in antiquity, along with Atlantis and Ogygia and so forth. And I will prove to you, almost without a shadow of a doubt, that this little island is not actually an island, because Scandinavia itself was not actually an island, though it was perceived as an island in antiquity. I will show how it fits pretty much perfectly. But today, most scholars believe it is the Orkneys, Shetland, northern Scotland, basically north of Great Britain. I will show that this is a misreading of Pytheas of Massalia, which is the oldest source of Thule. So the thought that Thule, an island, can be part of a peninsula can feel quite foreign. How does this puzzle piece work, right? You can't look at geography, you have to look at history to understand that this works. Because in history it was pretty much unanimously viewed as an island, or an island world even. The most glaring instance is that of Pomponius Mela, who put the Scandinavian peninsula as an island world, right? Here is Denmark, and these islands here are Scandinavia. So they basically made the whole archipelago into an island world. This is the most island-filled part of the world by far, as I've also discussed several times at this point. And that is why they conceived of these as an island or several islands. Along with also that a peninsula can, of course, be perceived as an island from a certain vantage point as well. The conceptual overlap between an island and a peninsula is quite obvious. And that is why the mysterious islands were called Nisos in antiquity. Because Nisos means, first of all, they say that it means Necho, which I believe is not true at all, but that it actually comes from the second interpretation, from Nasja, or Nos, or Nechs, meaning nose, meaning cape or promontory. Or in Swedish, Näs, which is cognate with the word for nose in Swedish as well, Näsa. And it means peninsula. So this is probably the origin of the word for Nisos, or island in Greek. So now that we have got that covered, let us look at what Pytheas of Massalia actually said, which was quoted in Strabo. So he is quoting Eratosthenes, who made the measurements of the earth very correctly, which we use even today. And he goes by a meridian from Meroe to Alexandria, to the Hellespont, to Dnieper, and then to Thule. So this is the most northern part of this parallel. And you can see that this parallel that is from Eratosthenes, which uses Thule, is a straight line, like this, from Meroe here to Alexandria, through the Hellespont, up to Dnieper, begins here. And then, if it is Scandinavia, it continues all the way straight up north, like this, to the most northern part of Europe. So, by logic, it should be this area, and not up here above Great Britain, because then you would have a line that goes perfectly straight north. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. It's perfectly straight north, and then for some reason just veers off like this to the west here. No, of course, the most common sense explanation is that this is supposed to be one straight line which was used to calculate the Earth, Eratosthenes, going straight up to the actual northern part of the world, at least in Europe, right? Northern part of Scandinavia. And I will show that these distances here work perfectly, especially when you use the ancient geography. But it works very well even when you convert it into modern geography. And to understand this, you just need one simple key, which I will show you now. Ptolemy, the map which we have discussed in the previous video and several videos before in my first video series, this is the most influential map of the ancient times, right? The Geographia. He presumes that 1 degree, like this, from 61 to 62, for instance, is 500 stadia. And he doesn't even source where this assumption comes from. It is simply a given in his time. So it's probably quite old and very accepted. This 500 stadia per degree. And you can see it, for instance, here in this book. It says, it is well known, on the other hand, that Ptolemy, like Marinus before him, did not accept Eratosthenes' measure of the meridian corresponding to 700 stadia per degree, adopting instead the measure of 500 stadia per degree. And then it says in the source that the origin of this new measure is unknown. Ptolemy, without mentioning Eratosthenes' measure, simply states that there was a general consensus of the measure of 500 stadia per degree. We know from him that the same measure had been adopted by Marinus. And then, in this source, says, taking the true measure of a degree as 600 stadia, Eratosthenes took 700 stadia and Posidonius 500 stadia. Perhaps as coming last, or for some other reason, we cannot now trace this measure prevailed over that of Eratosthenes. And then on page 26, he calculated the degree as 500 stadia, whereas it is actually equal to 600 stadia. This is the measurement we use today. Hence, Ptolemy's degree is only 5/6 of the true degree. So it is 1/6 too small. So 500 stadia is a little bit too small, but this was the standard in Ptolemy's time and before him. With that understanding, let us look at this meridian again. So from Meiro to Alexandria, there are 10,000 stadia, which is then 20 degrees. Looking at Ptolemy's map, you have Meiro here, the island of Meiro, beginning at just above 10 degrees or 11 degrees, and going all the way up to Alexandria at just above 31 degrees. So 20 degrees. This is 10,000 stadia. And from thence to the Hellespont, 8,100, and from thence to Dnieper, 5,000. So over the Hellespont is not perfect, but to the Dnieper, which is 13,100 degrees to the Dnieper, this fits very well on Ptolemy's map, because 13,100 degrees is just shy of 17 degrees. And from 31 degrees from Alexandria to where the Dnieper begins at 48.5 degrees. 48.5 minus 31 is 17.5 degrees, or just shy of 17 degrees. So this is quite accurate. And thence to the parallel of Thule, it is 11,500 degrees, which by the same logic is 22.5 degrees. So from 48.5 degrees to the most northern part of Scandinavia, 71 degrees. 71 minus 48.5 is 22.5 degrees. So these distances are accurate to a staggering degree, right? And it is a meridian from Meiro to Alexandria to the Dnieper, and from there all the way up to the most northern part of the Western world, like this. A straight line from which they calculated the measurements of the Earth. It would, of course, be very weird if they went from here to here, all the way up to Dnieper, and from there to here. This is not a good way to make measurements of the Earth, and actually no one in history has ever done this, because this is just stupid. This is, of course, not where Thule is, but it continues by logic straight up like this to the actual most northern part of the world. And as you see now, if you just use the standard of 500 stadia per degree in antiquity, you get measurements that are quite precise, actually. So they knew quite well where the northern part of Scandinavia was. And you can see that Strabo knew of the opinion that Thule was supposed to be in a parallel above the Dnieper, but he says, what man in his senses could ever agree to this? He thought that that idea was preposterous. And he also says that Pytheas, who has given us the history of Thule, is known to be a man upon no reliance can be placed. So he was simply acted out of incredulity. But we can see with our modern eyes that this parallel actually is quite, not just works, but actually fits quite well, actually. Making it very, not just possible, but in my opinion, undeniable that this is the intended location of Thule, because this fits along the parallel which is outlined. Therefore, this source is the same as the one of Procopius, which everybody agrees on is Scandinavia, since it identifies tribes such as the Gayats, the Sami people, the Skritfinni, and the Heruls. It is believed to be the same place as Skansa in Jordanes. And I've shown you now that Pytheas' source is also the same. That is all for this time. I will delve into Thule more in the future. This was just a show that Thule is undeniably the most northern part of Scandinavia. I will see you soon.